Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Always such a kind introduction. Thank you, Raymond. I'm going to share my screen now because it helps me to keep on track. And I don't want to take up a lot of time because we've got some really incredible people joining us today. We're very honored to have with us. But first of all, I want to say a massive thank you to Alia, who's very quietly hiding over there, and without whom everything that's happening today wouldn't have happened. She's been absolutely amazing. So thank you, Alia, you're a superstar. And thank you to Berna as well for reading that beautiful prayer. That prayer was written by a domestic abuse survivor for my book, actually, and it always makes me really emotional to hear it because it's so heartfelt and beautiful, and I think sums up that experience really powerfully. I'm going to take a few moments just to talk to you a little bit about the 16 days of global activism. I know some of you here will be very familiar with it, and others less so. So I just want to talk a little bit about what it is and why it's important. And the importance as well of us all working together on this. And just to highlight the way CSAN and the National Board of Catholic Women, and I can see many of you from the board here today, have been working together and have made a joint statement that's up on both websites today. A joint statement about the International Day, the elimination of violence against women and girls. So please do have a look for that and download it and put it on your websites and share it widely. It's really important that people see that the Catholic Church is responding to this. I also wanted to say, just before we really enter into the material of this webinar, that this is tricky stuff. And it may be tricky for some more than others. So please, if we're having discussions, do be sensitive to the fact that this might be triggering to some people. But if you need to, do switch off your camera, step away. And Alia's putting up in the chat some information about where to get support if you are impacted or if you're worried about something as a result of this webinar. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the UN International Day for Ending Violence Against Women and Girls, which is on the 25th of November, it's this Saturday. And that kicks off 10 days of global activism to end violence against women and girls, which culminates on the 10th of December, International Human Rights Day. And the 25th of November was chosen for a very special reason. It was chosen because on the 25th of November, 1960, 3 sisters were murdered. Their names were Patria, Minerva, and Maria Teresa Mirabal. And they were murdered in the Dominican Republic as a result of their activism against the brutal dictatorship of Rafael Trujillo. And since 1981, this day has been marked every year as the International Day for Ending Violence Against Women and Girls, remembering women who've been murdered, but also looking forward to prevention, trying to change that story for the future. And why is it that we as Catholics need to be thinking about this, need to be joining this action? There are currently 100 women walking around today, somewhere in the UK, who won't be with us by the time we're marking this date next year. We don't know who they are, but we know that that's roughly the number of women who are murdered by their partner or ex-partner each year. We also know that Currently in the UK, a woman is attacked in her home every 6 seconds somewhere in the UK. We know that in the last year, more than 10,000 women were turned away from refuges, or they were trying to seek safety. Refuges are having to close because of austerity measures, and the situation is becoming worse. We also know that migrant women face additional barriers to safety, and we're going to be hearing more about that. Around the world, violence against women is the most prevalent human rights violation. And we know from research by the UN that a woman is murdered by a partner or family member every 11 minutes, somewhere around the world. 1 in 3 women have been subjected to sexual or physical violence. And we know that this gets worse with climate change and with conflict. And why do we as Catholics need to be responding to this? Now, the Pope has spoken many times about the importance of addressing this issue and about the horror of this issue. And just a few weeks ago, in a statement that's linked to the CSAN and International Board of Catholic Women's statement, he said it's our duty, the responsibility of each person, to give a voice to our voiceless sisters, and that it's necessary to act immediately at all levels with determination, urgency, and courage. Now, the Catholic Church has been answering this, and some of us for many, many years. The National Board of Catholic Women, and I see many of you here today, has been talking about this issue for decades, long before anyone else in the church was. And really, any of the work that we're doing, we stand on the shoulders of our sisters who bravely spoke about it at a time when that wasn't as easy. And many of those incredible women are still with us and still fighting shoulder to shoulder with us and guiding us now. We're so grateful for that. The Catholic Bishops' Conference set up the Domestic Abuse Working Group, which ran for nearly 10 years. And I was privileged to sit on that. And then that was passed to the CSAN Domestic Abuse Alliance, which is why we're here today. But there are also projects such as Caritas Westminster's Safe in Faith, which Raymond's kindly spoke about, and the Kita House that we're going to be hearing about. I noticed John is here today, and he co-founded both of those projects, so some amazing allies. So there has been a lot of work that we can build on, but we still need to do it, because violence against women is still a horrific problem. I mentioned earlier that a woman is attacked in her home every 6 seconds somewhere in the UK. That's 100 women in the 10 minutes that I'm talking to. We absolutely cannot afford not to take action, not to answer this call to do something. And if you're wondering what it is that we can do, we're going to be hearing today about a 16-day calendar that we're launching today with suggested actions. But also you can visit the UN Women's website. The theme for this year is Unite, Invest to Prevent Violence Against Women and Girls. And that investment can take so many forms, whatever your skills. We heard on Sunday about talents and using our talents. And, you know, we can use our talents to invest to prevent violence against women and girls. So I invite all of you to join us starting on Saturday for the next 16 days to Orange the World. We wear orange as a sign of hope. I'm very, very grateful to all of you for joining us today. I'm very grateful for all the activism that's happened already. And because I'm relentlessly hopeful, I'm also already grateful for the activism that's about to happen during this 16 days and moving forward. I'm going to pass on now to our first speaker, who we're really honoured to have with us. And I'm honoured to call a colleague at Caritas Westminster, Karen Ansteth. Karen is the service manager at the Bakita House, which she joined, having spent 31 years working with traumatized victims as a Metropolitan Police officer. In 1985, she became a specialist trained officer dealing with victims of sexual crime. And later, Karen was instrumental in the creation of Sapphire, the unit that at the time investigated serious sexual offences. Since 2010, Karen has worked closely with the church in supporting victims of trafficking, and this highly successful partnership has culminated in the creation of the Bakita House in June 2015. Karen, we're really honoured and happy to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki, for such a lovely introduction. Now we're going to try and screen share. This could go wrong, as it's me. I think it's appropriate for me to start. Sorry, I can't actually see my own screen. That's not very good, is it? With a quote from one of my guests. So she said, "Imagine my joy at being in love, a gift I never thought I'd have, a marriage proposal approved by all. Now imagine how fast you can travel from heaven to hell." Hold on, sorry, I'm just having trouble changing to the next slide. So in 2014, 3 victims of trafficking went to Rome to meet with Pope Francis. It was on that day that he formed the Santa Marta group. They are put together as lead police chiefs, cardinals and bishops from around the world to raise awareness of this global crime, to try and eradicate it. Cardinal Vincent then came back and asked what the Metropolitan Police would need in London. And he said it would be wonderful if we had a safe house where the victims could go until they gave evidence at court. And of course, Cardinal Vincent arranged for Bakita to be formed. So we now have the Santa Marta group, Bakita House. They then looked at St Mary's University that has the Bakita Centre for Slavery, Exploitation and Abuse. So now we've got the research centre, and of course we partner the police in this initiative. So we opened in 2015. Since then, we've had 183 guests from 49 countries, aged 15 to 70 years, and 13 babies. And those amazing women have convicted traffickers to 178 years and 10 months in prison so far. And we're now waiting 2 more convictions that are coming through before Christmas. This broken bridge, why are you looking at it? Because it's the most important thing. Every woman that comes to us is different, but the one thing they always have in common is they have no trust. It's literally been kicked out of them. So to try and help them, we need to rebuild that bridge of trust. And believe me, it will lead to recovery, a better life with dignity, and most importantly, safety. What do? We do an immediate risk assessment, only because it helps the woman, but it helps all the women we may have and all our staff. And then we put into place a support plan. They always have medical issues, the dentist, Specsavers, the sexual health clinic, all of these things that we can help them to assist with so they can start putting their lives back together. They come with trauma which will go up and down throughout their stay with us, due to giving evidence at court, to an asylum case, due to family at home that they want to be reunited with. We can help with all these things. And we eat together. It's very important to the women. We eat together every night at 7 o'clock, and that shows them, women that were in that position but have started to move on, it gives them hope. It also surrounds them with a community of people that have suffered, but that can now help each other. And believe me, the women do help each other. The ones that have been here longer take the newer ones under our wing, and it's an amazing thing to see. We offer a lot of in-house services. We have art, music, drama and yoga, all trained therapists. We offer things like gardening and the gym. We fill that week with things that may help them to deal with their own trauma, their own inner ambitions. It's just something to put in those life back together. Wellbeing sessions. We have 36 volunteers that help with all of this. Also, education is very important. Some of our women have never had a chance of any education, so we teach them to read and write in their own language, and then alongside that, everybody gets to learn English, because it's important moving forward that they feel like everyone else, that they're strong enough to deal with their own paperwork. If they're entitled to work, we get them NI numbers. If they've got settled status, we get the paperwork to prove that. If they want to stay and they need help with immigration, we've got solicitors that we can turn to help them with that as well. Obviously, some of them would like to go home, and that's another thing that we help with, making sure there's a charity at the other end that will support them, or police that can help them. Living together, they learn about cultural differences and different faiths. This is very important because, as we all know, London is one of the most diverse cities in the world. So to learn about other cultures is very important to them, because you don't know who they're going to be living with moving forward. We take pregnant women. And in fact, we were due a baby last Wednesday. He's decided to stay in the nest for a little while. So if he stays too long, he'll be coming out to join us on Friday. So everybody's very excited here at the moment, because new life brings new hope to everybody, not just the woman that's giving birth. We have a sister that helps with faith guidance. So we have many faiths. At the moment, we have 9 women from 8 countries and 7 different faiths. So we help them to find the place that they may need to go to celebrate that. And Marley. Marley is a great big, well-structured black and white cat, but he's very good for trauma. He gives out lots of cuddles, and he goes to sit beside those that are the most traumatized. He's very welcoming and homely. Trafficking, what is it? There's an act in trafficking. It's the recruitment, the transportation, the transfer and harbouring of the receipt of persons. How is it done? They use threats of violence, or they use violence, coercion, abduction, fraud and deception. It's an abuse of power or vulnerability, or giving payments or benefits to a person in control of the victim. And why is it done? It's exploitation. It can include sexual exploitation, forced labour, slavery or similar, and the removal of organs. But it's done for money at the end of the day. It's the second most profitable crime in the world after gun crime. I looked at the violence against women and girls, and it's defined here. It's any act of gender-based violence in or are likely to result in physical, sexual or mental health, harm or suffering to women and girls, including threats of such acts, coercion or arbitrary deprivation of liberty, wherever occurring in public or in private place. So we can already see the crossovers. Similarities, when you look at it very quickly, they both use force, fraud or coercion to manipulate their victims. Many of the factors present in an abusive relationship, such as the use of isolation and intimidation to harm the victim. They all exist in trafficking. Human trafficking is the largest second largest criminal industry in the world. And when you look at the facts, victims of sexual abuse are at higher risk of being trafficked than any other person. In human trafficking, often traffickers prey on their victims' needs for love, affirmation or care, or they use a person's vulnerability due to past abuse, lack of family, homelessness or need for basic care. We also see women sold into marriage so the family can be financially supported. This can lead to the husband seeing his wife as a commodity to be used, not even seen as a person. So we cross over trafficking and domestic violence. And remember, they don't care if they hurt a commodity. It's not about love, it's about power and control, physically and psychologically. There's many, many barriers. The main barrier we find here with who we work with is the language barrier. It's very skillfully used by perpetrators to isolate their victims. It limits their means to escape as they're not aware of the assistance they could get in this country. Also, many services which are available are only in English. Asylum seekers often have no recourse to public funds, and that limits their access to many local services that may be able to help them. However, there is a good thing. If you're having an asylum application, if you go through the domestic violence route, it's one of the quickest ways to obtain status in this country at this time. I want to tell you about some of our guests now. So, Sheila is an Indian national aged 24. The man that was to become her husband travelled to her country, and when he met a friend in a factory, he saw her working there. She was working there to provide for her mother and a very physically and mentally ill brother. She was the only person that could earn money to support them. He approached her family and said that he would love her and marry her and bring her to the UK, where she would have a much better life. They would create a family. He would work. She would be at home, and then she would send money to her family to help them to survive each month. However, it was a very different story when she got to the UK, because he actually sent her out to work as a domestic slave in various households, and then he put her to factories where she was making wedding garments. This went on for several months. No money ever went home to help her family. And then she got pregnant. She believed this would change everything, that actually he did really love her, even though he was treating her so poorly. But it didn't, because he told her that she didn't have a termination. He would make sure that her family suffered, and he would make sure that her family knew that she brought shame upon them. And this, in that culture, is a massive thing. So she felt that she had to have the termination, and she did. She went through with it at 21 weeks, and the day after, he kicked her out onto the streets with nothing. Luckily for her, a charity picked her up. So we have a crossover here. Our next guest that we'd like to talk about is Sarah. Her husband-to-be approached her family through a family friend, and he paid for her. And he told her that he would bring her to the UK and that she could go to college, and that's what she wanted to do. She wanted more education, she wanted to learn, and she wanted to raise money for her family. It was very different when she arrived in the UK. The man that she'd married was a monster. He actually had another wife and 3 children. And at first, Sarah was told that she would look after these children and the other wife and do all the household chores. So she had responsibilities for 10 hours a day and no chance at education. Then he got her a job as well. So she's now working. He told her she had to pay back everything he'd paid for her. There was no love. And then he was physically abusing her as well. Eventually, she had enough of this, and she managed to escape and go to a police station. Her husband has been charged with controlling and coercive behaviour, threats to kill, common assault, and threatening to disclose private sexual images, and he will go to court. They are now also looking at the offences of trafficking. They all cross over. You'll be pleased to know that Sheila has now left our house. She said she can't believe she is now strong enough to make her own choices, to work and support herself, and to feel safe and no longer terrified every waking minute. Sarah is still with us, but the amazing team here have managed to enrol her in college. She goes there with people of her own age. She loves homework, very unusual, but she doesn't have the responsibility of the 3 children anymore. She wants to wake up each day now. Before she didn't, because when she woke up, she just used to wonder when the next punch or the next actual sexual assault would come. It's good news that her husband will go to court and she will give evidence. We're going on to guest 3 here. This guest came in as a trafficking case. Here in the middle, we have Anne O'Brien, her husband Martin Carroll, and Anne's sister Elizabeth Meir, who used to run brothels and enslave people to fund their home improvements. O'Brien was originally convicted in 2005 of controlling prostitution. She got let off with a 180-hour community punishment order and ordered to pay back £600,000 of her fortune. It was estimated that she'd made over £4 million in 5 years, and not working herself, but using the commodities, which are actually other women. And then in March 2017, a young Romanian girl, 17 at the time, passed through Stansted Airport with a man called Lucian Rosu. The woman had no money, no phone, and no return ticket, and the man was much older. They did the usual checks and they let the couple through. They then did some more checks and discovered that Lucian had brought the same woman through on previous two occasions. She'd said he was her boyfriend, but this really didn't match because he was so much older. So they phoned the Metropolitan Police, who attended the address that Lucian had given. We call this, when we talk about trafficking, the lover boy tactic. So you can see the similarities here between the two case studies we've already spoken about and this one. This victim had been sexually abused by her stepfather since she was 9, and then at 15 she got put into care. Lucian used to hang around outside the care home. He knew that most of the women in there had been deprived of love and were damaged. He knew that if he showed them any love, they would do what they wanted. And unfortunately for her, he preyed on this particular victim. And she did do whatever she wanted because it was completely coercive control. She believed in her head that he really did love her, and that coming here and getting abused and giving him all the money was what would make him love her more. When she came to us, we worked with her for over a year, and it took 6 months for her to even realise that this wasn't love, that she was simply being used, coerced into the things that she was doing. He did try and contact her from a phone that he had hidden in prison, and he tried to make her withdraw that statement by telling her that if she got out, they would be together. She was making the money on this trip to pay for his 3rd child's christening. Still, she believed there was a chance for them. But she did go ahead and she did give the evidence. And as you can see now, Anne was convicted of charges including conspiracy to control prostitution for gain, facilitating the travel of another person with a view to exploitation, and she received 10 years in prison. Her sister was found guilty of conspiracy to convert criminal property and 2 counts of keeping a brothel. She received 21 months in prison. And the husband was found guilty of conspiracy to convert criminal property and 2 counts of keeping a brothel for prostitution. He received 18 months suspended and 150 hours of unpaid work. I thought this was very unfair, but the reason that they did it was Anne and Carol had 2 children under 7, and they believed that one of the parents should remain out of prison to look after those children. Really not sure what upbringing they will have or morals they will have put into their lives. And Lucian, he was already convicted prior to this trial of facilitating the travel of another with a view to exploitation. He received 4.5 years in prison, but all for the bravery of the woman that stood up and gave that evidence. And for us, it was brilliant to see her have the strength to do that. Brilliant to see all these women moving on from something that most of us can't even imagine, to find a new life and to be strong again. So we can see there is crossovers with trafficking and domestic violence. There is abuse throughout all of these situations. I thought it would be best today to end on the words of one of my guests that left last week, because I think this is probably what we want for everyone. And when asked what she remembered about her first day at Paquita, she replied, "What Paquita has taught me is not to look back, but to look forward where my future is, and most importantly, where I will be safe." Thank you for listening today, and thank you for everything that you can possibly do in the future to help these victims, who obviously are now survivors and are moving on with their lives.
Thank you so much, Karen. That was incredibly powerful. And I think I'm really grateful for you being here today. I'm really grateful that we have the opportunity to look at some of these issues when we talk about domestic abuse, to understand the scope of experiences, and that the women that you're working with experience domestic abuse as part of the experiences that they're having of exploitation. Karen, I'm aware that you have such important work to do and you need to get back, and you may not be able to stay for the panel. So is it all right if I just ask if anyone has any questions for you now?
I am actually, one of my staff has come back from sick, so I'm all right at the moment.
Okay.
Unless the baby comes, and then I'll be off like a whippet.
Right. Okay. So, you know, we heard from Karen. We're going to hear in a minute from Gisela about the work of the Latin American Women's Rights Society. I think it's really important, all of us, that we do take care of ourselves. So if before we move on to the next talk, if we can just take 5 minutes perhaps to, you know, if people just want a comfort break, refresh your cup of tea, because this is very heavy information, and we need to take care of ourselves while we're receiving this. So if that's okay, we'll take 5 minutes and then come back, and we'll hear then from Gisela and then from Joe. But thank you so much, Karen, and I'm really pleased that we can keep you for the whole event. That's great news. Thank you. So it's 11:40. If we can come back at about 11:45, if that's okay. I think everyone's coming back. We're going to move on in a second to our next speaker, who is Gisela Valle, and she's going to talk about supporting migrant survivors of violence against women and girls. Gisela is the director of the Latin American Women's Rights Service. The Latin American Women's Rights Service works at the intersection of women, migrants, and workers' rights, racial inequality, and human rights. Before joining, Gisela worked in the women's sector in the UK, as well as researching on European human rights. And before coming to the UK, Gisela practiced law in Mexico, including working as legal counsel for the local government and as legal counsel in Mexico's Senate. Gisela holds a master's degree in international law with a focus on human rights from Vanderbilt University in the US, and an undergraduate degree in law from ITESM in Mexico. We're really honoured to have Gisela with us today. You're very, very welcome. I'm going to hand over to her now.
Thank you. Apologies, I didn't bring a PowerPoint presentation. And it's really great to hear from Karen and Bakita House, who I have to say have supported the users, the service users we have from LORS in several cases of modern slavery as well as domestic abuse. So as Nikki said, LORS is a by and for Latin American migrant women's organization. We support over 2,000 women per year facing violence, exploitation, precarious living conditions, and barriers to social protection. We address these women's practical and strategic needs. On the practical level, we provide advice on areas of violence against women and girls, housing, welfare benefits, employment, and immigration. And we provide mental health support for survivors of violence and labor exploitation. These services are complemented by social integration projects, community organizing, and a young women and girls empowerment project. On the strategic level, we do policy advocacy and campaigning work on migrant women's rights in areas of law and labor exploitation. And as part of this work, we lead the Step Up Migrant Women campaign and coalition, supported by over 50 organizations. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this event. The presentation that I'm going to do is touching on a few key aspects of the experiences and needs of Black and minoritized migrant women, but with a very broad brush approach. As Nikki and Karen already mentioned, violence against women and girls is a significant problem in the UK. However, migrant women face additional factors that increase the risk to gender-based violence and that creates barriers to living abusive situations, rebuilding their lives and accessing justice. One of the main factors in this is the hostile, rebranded as compliant environment, continues to be very hostile. This was a governmental policy developed in 2010, 2012 that sought to create a hostile environment for irregular migrants by moving border controls into daily life. So instead of facing these controls at the border, however you come, you face them in your day-to-day interactions. This has affected rights to rent, banking, social welfare, social housing, access to healthcare, higher education, sometimes education at all levels. There have been some initiatives on and off requiring parents to justify their immigration status to enroll children in schools. Also employment, support from statutory services with a particular focus on the police and social services who always, or in most cases, ask for immigration status as a deterrent to look into cases of domestic abuse. For survivors of domestic abuse, all of these will have a significant impact when trying to escape violence and abuse, as their immigration status and immigration control will often take precedence over their safety and that of their children. I think Karen very powerfully already went into some of these issues. In 2019, Lawyers on the Step of Migrant Women Coalition published a report called The Right to be Believed, highlighting the experiences of migrant survivors when approaching the police in London. Migrant women wait much longer to report violence than women more generally. And two of the key topics highlighted by this report were the high levels of fear from immigration enforcement and how this fear adds to the length and complexity of abuse experienced by this group of survivors. This was reinforced very recently in a report by IMCAN and the Center for Women's Justice called Life or Death, which concluded that the act of approaching the police for protection can mean overcoming enormous barriers for some Black and minoritized women, but there is no recognition by officers that this very act shows the level of desperation and fear that a woman is facing, that this is for her a last resort. At Lawyers, we continue to see the prevalence of this issue, even when survivors have access to specialist buy-in for services. Nevertheless, after 6 years of campaigning from Step Up, there continues to be a lack of will to address this. Cases are dropped by the police or flagged as no further action. There is an underestimation of risk, and perpetrators continue to be unaccountable for their abuse. For example, in a very serious case we had last year, after multiple interventions from our services, a survivor of abuse and stalking finally got the courage to report the perpetrator to the police, only to find that the police refused to investigate, instead reporting the survivor to immigration enforcement. Although this was identified as a high-risk case, that means, serious risk of harm or even lethal violence, the only follow-up from the authorities was an immigration enforcement letter from the immigration authorities. There were more instances of stalking, and the caseworker recommended again for the survivor to approach the police. But after this recommendation, the survivor finally decided to disengage from our services as she didn't feel safe enough to go back to the police. Sadly, to this day, we don't know what happened with this case. There is another issue called immigration abuse. One of the cases that were subjected to a domestic homicide review, so that is the review of failings by institutional statutory services, that was analyzed in that life of death report, was the case of Aline Godinho. And this is a very powerful case that, we were involved in the domestic homicide review, and just rereading the notes from the case, it really stays with you. Aline was a Brazilian woman who experienced multiple instances of domestic abuse at the hands of her partner until she was finally fatally stabbed in 2019. Aline was the victim of multiple forms of abuse, including non-fatal strangulation, economic abuse, online stalking and harassment, and coercive and controlling behavior. One of the key things about this case is that Aline got in contact both with the police and social services through different and multiple contacts with these two statutory services multiple times in the time the abuse was escalating to where it ended, sadly. However, Aline experienced multiple barriers to access support, safety, and justice. As Karen already talked, one of the main issues is that she never got provided with an interpreter, meaning that when she was in contact with social services, the partner was always there interpreting for her. And when she was in contact with the police, she had to rely on a friend to provide the interpretation for the police. That means, you know, as long as the friend was available, she could contact the police, but if the friend wasn't available, there was no way. The police had several failures, from identifying risk to inadequate responses based on immigration status, to a lack of weight given to language barriers and immigration abuse, to referrals to mainstream services who, as useful as they are, do not understand the particular needs of Black and minoritized migrant women, and therefore are not able to provide the level of service that specialist bioinformed services are able to provide. For example, we have volunteers that provide over 2,000 hours of translating services each year. I mean, we don't wait for statutory services to be able to provide that. We provide women 2 days and also translation services to access other support like, you know, immigration legal advice, housing, welfare, all of that. But you know, statutory services keep doing these referrals to the services they know of, which are usually the biggest national mainstream services, who don't really understand what the issues are with this group. In one of the most confounding aspects of Aline's case, and how it exemplified the way that perpetrators use the immigration system to coerce and control the victims, knowing full well that statutory services will prioritize immigration control over the protection of survivors of domestic abuse. This perpetrator did the following. He first destroyed her passport and the children's passports. They had 4 children. He claimed that to the children's safeguarding team that Aline wanted to stay in the UK illegally, and they know full well that saying illegal migrants will trigger specific responses. Claimed that Aline wouldn't be able to remain in the UK after the divorce, claimed that Aline had taken the perpetrator's documents, so kind of just transferring the dynamics of abuse to the victim and presenting the victim as the perpetrator of abuse. He threatened Aline that he was going to report her to the Home Office and that she would be arrested and deported. And then he followed through and reported her to a Home Office on the basis of the breakdown of the relationship, with automatically what that does, it puts you in breach of your visa conditions because you have a partner visa or you have a spousal visa, and the moment the relationship breaks, you're not complying with that. In one of the most chilling findings from the domestic homicide review, the perpetrator made clear that he wanted, and I quote, Aline and the family to return to Brazil so he could have power over them all. And you can probably think what kind of power he wanted and what for, although he never said that explicitly. Yet there are no protections built into the system to prevent perpetrators from manipulating the immigration system in this manner. On the contrary, there is a high presumption that survivors use the system to their advantage for the purposes of remaining in the UK. And I and the rest of the team of lawyers have heard on multiple occasions the gaming of the system, the manipulation of the system. This is the way that survivors are presented, as if they are in that powerful position of using this false narrative, because obviously you're not gaming the system if you're telling the truth, right? And using the system as it's designed to be used. But the implication is that you're lying in order to gain an unfair advantage. And until this changes, this will continue being a very high risk situation for migrant survivors, and will, more importantly, continue preventing migrant survivors to approach statutory services even when their life or their well-being are in danger. Now, the problem with the introduction of the hostile environment is that it has pushed a consistent message and practice in statutory services, in which immigration status is prioritized over the safety of survivors, including their children. It's really amazing to me always how quickly there is a request to see immigration status. And it's very strange in a way. I keep thinking perhaps a comparative, although not real case, would be if you were trying to go to police to report you've been a victim of robbery, and the police would say, oh, but we can't allow, people to break the law on tax. So how are your taxes this year? Have you done, like, it's just not necessary to understand immigration status to support these women. It might be necessary later on to see what entitlements they have and what kind of support they need, but not at the first instance, not when you're trying to report and then can I see your passport, can I see your visa? When interacting with social services, for example, immigration status tips the balance in favor of putting children of migrant survivors in the care of the state or in the hands of perpetrators, particularly those with secure status or British citizenship. This often extends long beyond the culmination of interventions from the criminal justice system, where children end up in the hands of perpetrators for years. And we have seen cases in which perpetrators use the family courts as a way of continuing to abuse the victim. We had a very extraordinary case not so long ago of this woman with a very good employment situation. She had very good earnings, that was pushed to food banks just on the amount of money she had to pay to continue to have contact with the children and to try and reverse the living of the children in the care of perpetrators of domestic abuse. Now, on the other hand, one of the things that we keep hearing about, okay, so there are other statutory services where women can go and report. So one of the most commonly cited ones are GPs and healthcare professionals. And we keep telling people the problem with migrant women is that they're so scared of the system, even when they have some form of status. They don't have to be undocumented to be scared about the system, that they often are not even in contact with healthcare services. They're worried that either they're going to be asked for their immigration status or they're going to be charged for healthcare services, which also happens quite often. So that means that they will not approach. This is an avenue that's not open to them. So police is out, social services are out, healthcare services are out, and that leaves women with very, very few options to come forward. Now, this is very, very key, because one of the things that fire and force services are very good at is identifying all these myriad of risk and complexities that are part of every case. However, we're not taking seriously as experts in our fields, which is that intersection of, gender and race and migration, amongst other things. I mean, we usually include class and culture because there's a serious problem with the economic situation of migrants in the UK, but also there's a lot of things that are ascribed to culture, as there's a very wide understanding that Latin America is a place where machismo happens a lot. So there's a very heavy gender aspect to violence against women and girls, which is not untrue. But here, the issue is not the culture of the victim or the culture of the perpetrator. Not all perpetrators are going to be from an ethnic minority background, but the responses from statutory services, because they know that the statutory services, as the instruments of the state, will provide them with further opportunities to continue abusing women when they know the responses are going to be so poor. And I think the case of Alini is really good. So let's destroy your passports. Let's tell statutory services that you're trying to be here illegally. Let's call the Home Office and make you undocumented. So there's a way where the state kind of supports this violence through means that obviously are not designed for that, but are used for that. Now, in the case, for example, of Alini and the domestic homicide review, we were approached by the chair of the review to ask about the cultural aspects of the case. And I said to her, look, this is not a cultural thing. This is going to be, and if you look, this is before I knew kind of any information about Alini, you're going to see usually statutory services fail these women. And once I got the information from the case, because we were participating in the domestic homicide review, I realized, like, you know, contact with social services, contact with the police, contact with the police, contact with social services. And I went, well, yeah, this is not a cultural thing. It's a systemic failure when it comes to migrant women that gets evidence very, very well in many cases, but in cases of lethal violence, when they are recorded that way as having an immigration status and coming from a Black or minoritized background, it's very clear where the failures are. So what can be done to prevent abuse and support Black and minoritized migrant survivors? First, there needs to be a much better understanding of the interplay between gender, race, ethnicity, and class with immigration status, its effect on vulnerability to domestic abuse, human trafficking, and other forms of violence against women and girls, and its impact on safety and support, and to design outcomes that address this interplay to adequately respond to the need of these survivors. So what I mean by this is that usually when we talk about these things, we talk, for example, gender here and race here. It's not the reality how women experience these. These things are going to interplay on one another to produce very specific results. So unless we have a way of addressing these things where we see how the combination of interplay of factors create specific outcomes, it's going to be very difficult to design support services and other types of interventions that really address this. As I said, we need to address legislation, policy, and practice on these barriers and these systemic failures that affect safety and access to justice for migrant women. We have a campaign on safe reporting mechanisms. So what we're asking for is that the police and immigration remain in their lanes and do not have that interplay between them, where if you try to approach the police, they are more focused on immigration status. There needs to be a separation between the two to allow women to be able to come through. And this applies to other statutory services, but our campaign mainly focuses on the police. We need to have equal access to services and standardized practices that truly center the needs of Black and minoritized migrant women and respond to the complexities they experience. To give you an example, there's a new risk assessment tool that the police is using, and Tahoe Black Sisters was talking about this the other day, where there is no question around honor-based abuse. And that means that you're going to have this group of women who are more at risk of honor-based abuse and having kind of fatal violence as a result of that, who are not even in the radar of the police because the question is not being asked. There has to be a better engagement between statutory services, government departments, and local authorities with specialist fire force services. We're not on the radar, we're not funded, we're not supported. The police don't know even where to call when they have these women in front of them. And that means there is a much better need for us to work together and for us to bring our specialism to the table and say, look, these are the things that you need to do. We need to have more focus on prevention. And I think it's great that the 16 days of activism are going to focus on that, and less reliance in criminal justice responses. As Black and minoritized migrant women are less likely to engage with the criminal justice system for complex reasons, and they traditionally experience poor responses from it. We need more routes to regularization of immigration status independently of perpetrators. Now, the reason I'm saying this to all of you, and I appreciate that I've been going over my time by a lot, is because from where you're at, you have a lot of opportunities to push this agenda, not to let just fire and force services keep pushing, to support this agenda. first, we have a Step Up Migrant Women campaign and coalition. You can sign up to it. I will put the information in the chat, and you can support the work that we're doing. This campaign, just so you know, even though we have over 50 organizations in the coalition, is led by specialist Bio-4 organizations. So we have a steering group that's formed exclusively by Bio-4 organizations that's at the heart of the decision-making of the campaign. You can partner with, support, and donate to your local specialist Bio-4 services. Learn about the needs of Black and minoritized women in your area and how can you support them. From guidance to identify and help to combat violence against women and girls, for example, through religious organizations. And one of the things that was really good in Alini's case is that her local church supported her throughout. And they were very, very keen making sure she was safe. And they were very, very keen to make sure that she understood that religion could not be used as a way to maintain abusive situations. You can promote your local services with the community, with the congregations. You can demand that local and national authorities commission Bio-4 services. And, you know, generally just keep spreading the message as far as you can. As I said, we have worked with Paquita House. Even when we need emergency accommodation, we know we can get in touch with them. And if there's spaces available, we can get spaces. So there's many ways. You can do clothes drives, you can do, you know, donation drives, you could do period products drives, you can do, there's a lot. And then, yeah, I think get to know your Bio-4 services, help where you can, support the campaigns, support the call for action. If you have good relationships with your local MP, for example, that would be amazing. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gisela. That was incredibly powerful. And I have, I know you're staying for the panel. I have so many questions. I'm sure loads of other people have so many questions. And we're just very, very grateful to have you with us. I'm going to hand over now to Joe, who's going to talk about the call to action and what we can do when we're facing all these situations and these people who are suffering. Jo is the head of community projects at Father Hudson's Care. She's been a manager in the voluntary sector for 17 years in a local, national and regional charity. At Father Hudson's Care for over 8 years, she's overseen and developed numerous community and accommodation services covering homelessness, refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants and older people. We're very, very grateful and lucky to have Jo with us today. I'm going to hand over to you.
Hi, thank you everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Can everyone see that okay? Yeah. Oh, brilliant. So I mean, everyone's set the standing really high for the presentations today. So I'm honoured to be part of that, and hopefully I can continue it. So my name's Jo Waters, and I'm the head of community projects at Father Hudson's Care. I'm going to talk a bit to start with about how our organisation empowers women, and also then I'll be sharing the call to action for you all. So at Father Hudson's Care, the social care agency of the Archdiocese of Birmingham, we were founded in 1902, and our geographical reach, we go from North Staffordshire down across Birmingham to Worcester and across to Oxford, so quite a large area. So our mission is to reach out and to support those in need and improve their quality of life. And we have a various amount of services around disability, older people, fostering, after adoption. But what I'm going to focus on today is our work with community projects. And we specialise in support services and accommodation for those who are marginalised and excluded. And this includes women, and this includes migrants, and also those experiencing homelessness. Oh, you did next. Is that on the next slide? Yeah.
Yeah, it's changed now.
Perfect. Sorry, I'm on two screens. So. So, I mean, many of our community projects do prioritise support for women, and a number of them solely support women. So, the fact that all of our services are in a community settings or through outreach, and we really find that having them in the community in a non-threatening, welcoming, and non-statutory community venue makes it more accessible for female migrants, especially. We try to, where possible, make our services open to all that will benefit. However, we do have groups and activities which are women only, where we have a safe space for women to come together. We also have accommodation, which is women only, as well as some mixed gender spaces. Now, where we do have mixed gender spaces, we have changed more recently so that they're all single bedrooms rather than the shared accommodation that we used to have in our night shelter. And our shared spaces are just in our larger projects, where we have staff and volunteers on site 24/7. Where we don't have that, we make sure that it's just single sex. And the other area we find that our projects are accessible is that having volunteers in the projects, and it makes them feel more warm and welcoming, and having that feeling of community, it just makes it more accessible for people who are vulnerable. And we also make sure we have volunteering opportunities, and a number of our staff have been recruited through this route. And because of this route, one of our projects, our largest number of staff are women with lived experience of migration, and it's because we had that route for them. Now, I'm going to talk about, to just highlight a few of our projects. And our key projects that are relevant for today are Brushstrokes, which is in Sandwell, where we provide holistic advice and support for refugees, asylum seekers and migrants. So this project has grown in the last, say, 6 or 7 years to 4 times the size that it used to be. And I was interested in what Gisela was saying around health. So one of the big areas where we have grown is around health inequalities and our health inclusion work, especially with migrants and our work in the hotels as well. I'm also going to mention our 3 accommodation projects, Table Living, Fatima House, Sophia House. And then I just want to make a mention to our refugee community sponsorship work, where we've welcomed 5 families, but 2 of these were really quite vulnerable female-led single parent families, and we were able to support them by a group of volunteers in the community, really welcoming and supporting those families, and they're thriving there. So these are some pictures that I've picked for our project at Brushstrokes. We have about 50 staff, about 60 volunteers, and we have over 3,000 clients every year from over 100 countries. As already explained, we make sure we're a community venue that feels safe for migrant women to access. And many of our staff and volunteers are female, and many have lived experience in migration. We've got a wide range of advice, immigration advice, practical support, like food and clothing, family support, social activities, etc. One area to mention is that many of our ESOL, our English students, are women, and we make sure that in the curriculum for ESOL that we use examples of women at work and women doing employment work and women being active in the community in the curriculum. And we've had feedback that women they value this community environment, and they'd feel uncomfortable either going to a college setting, or they'd actually find it really difficult, they struggle to get their family to agree for them to go to a college setting. We've set up our weekly women's group, which is organised by a small group of female staff who have all got lived experience in migration, and it's led by the women who are at the group, and it's a safe space. And we've had such great feedback from the women there can share the stories with each other, and there's been a real focus on sharing their difficult experiences and journeys and just that peer support. From that, they've asked to do things like yoga, we've done walks and crafts, and the main focus has been things to help with their health and well-being. We've done a number of tapestry workshops specifically designed for Afghan women in a bridging hotel. We worked a lot in the bridging hotel, and we found that a lot of the women were in the rooms more. It was quite difficult, they were quite isolated. So we did some health and well-being tapestry work, which is now all on display at Brushstrokes. In other ways, we have a really active user panel. and this has a female chair who has lived experience in migration. She also sits on our management committee, so we've supported her to be part of the management committee. She's a busy single mum. She's had a really difficult journey here. She now has status, and she brings refugee status, and she brings her young children to our meetings, and we just make sure we're welcoming and accessible for that. We've recently, one of the pictures on here is about a film night that we recently screened, and it's called The Women of 10 Downing Street, and it's about Punjabi female workers in Smethwick who went on strike for their rights in the 1990s. So we did a community screening of that. It was brilliant, loads of people attended. And we deal with homeless presentations to our centre on a weekly basis, and a proportion of these are women who are experiencing domestic abuse. We do find that most of the women or families, single parent families who come to us homeless have experienced domestic abuse. We've built great links with the local authority and Women's Aid to support this. And I just wanted to also mention that the women at the staff team at Brushstrokes have recently set up a new women's empowerment group, and they meet and talk about how women feel working at Brushstrokes, the impact of the different cultures of all the different staff who work there, how men are working in the centre, and women in leadership and different barriers. So we recently had someone from a senior manager from Citizens Advice Bureau came and gave us a talk on female empowerment and barriers. It was really positive. And then the picture in the middle is just part of one of our newsletters recently to portray female solidarity across the world. So the words below are just saying about a day in the life of Brushstrokes, how a woman from Ukraine was supported by a woman from Jamaica, a woman from Russia, and a woman from Afghanistan. And that's really is how it feels at Brushstrokes. Table Living is a mixed accommodation project. It was set up as a night shelter 7 years ago now. We have grown recently and made sure now we've got individual rooms. We've currently got, there's 4 women currently at Table Living. There's 19 beds there in total. And some information there about Table Living, but I'm just going to give an example of someone we've helped there. So Listra is Slovakian. So she'd been in the UK for 8 years, but she had not applied for status and she had no recourse to public funds. So she was referred to Table from the Birmingham Council as someone fleeing domestic abuse and needing somewhere safe to stay. So she got no accommodation, had no status, and they were not able to find her anywhere to go. She was fragile when she first came to Table, and she tried to push everyone away. And the volunteers and staff had to work really hard with her to find out her story and begin to build trust. And due to the controlling relationship, she had no other network. She'd never applied for settled status here. She really feared. I think a few of the presentations have said this about fearing telling the authorities I'm here. She thought she'd be deported. So we supported her to source documents, apply for status. Things were going really well with Listra, and she began to feel sort of belonging and safe. But her ex-partner found out her location. She really was in fear for her life. So we found it quite hard to find move-on accommodation. So the West Midlands Combined Authority have emergency funding, and we use this to do a local hotel, which we knew well, while we engaged local services, tried to find a more suitable refuge for her. We pulled together with the local authority, Women's Aid and another organisation, and she's now in a supported hostel. And she really would have struggled to do that. So we were like the bridging. So even though she didn't stay with us, we were that bridge, and that's what's important. It's that access to information. Just to finally mention 2 of our other accommodation projects. So all these accommodation projects have been set up in the last sort of 7 years, really, so that there's been a growing need for this. Prior to this, we didn't have this accommodation at Father Hudson's, and we could probably fill them all 5 times over. There's some information on the slide just about what Fatima House is and what Sophia House is. Many of the residents at Fatima House have experienced abuse and violence on their journeys before their stay. And at Sophia House, where I've been heavily involved, all all the women who have stayed with us since 2018 have experienced abuse, violence and trauma in their journeys. These are not specialist projects for that. That is the clients who are coming to us. But both of the projects, the women are running the house. They don't have 24/7 staff and volunteer presence. They do have support in the daytime from staff and volunteers where needed, but they really do come together and support each other. So my final case study is about Gloria. So Gloria at Sophia House is a refugee from a country in Africa, and she had no friends or family in the UK. She arrived as a victim of trafficking and worked and lived one-to-one with her abuser. She was in prison due to this, where she was found and supported by a local charity. She had a really long journey, and then she managed to get her leave to remain as a refugee. And as a refugee, she finally had a status and security, but she became stuck in a really large HMO. She had really poor mental health. And she was brought by another small charity, a women's support worker, heard about Sophia House and came to visit. And I actually did the first introduction visit with her. She was really unsure. She really wasn't. I mean, it's 3 bedrooms, lovely house in South Birmingham. She wasn't sure, and you have to meet her a number of times and give her that time and space. She's now got a long-term tenancy with us. After spending some time initially just to stabilise, she got a job at college. She then had a place at university. She's now nearly a qualified social worker. She's just passed her driving test. She's got her first car on the driveway last week, and we were like, wow. And she's got a part-time job in care. So Gloria is just wonderful what she's achieved. Sophia House is not a long-term accommodation project, but we like to make our projects work. We have funding where we can be flexible. So, we've said to Gloria she can stay there till she gets her first job. So that's really great. That's Father Hudson. So the 16 days of activism. Now, as Nikki said, this is launching on the 25th of November with the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And the theme this year is to invest to prevent violence against women and girls. So the 16 days are about making small actions to create big change. And you can group these actions into 4 main themes. So information and knowledge, donating and getting involved, prayer, and raising awareness. So these are the kind of 3 days that focus on information and knowledge sharing. So we got the launch day, as I mentioned earlier. On the 7th of November, we were asking people to look at the Safe in Faith online training, which has been mentioned by Caritas Westminster, and direct their parish priest to this. On the 9th of December, we are we'll be asking people to share information on how to spot the signs, and the Bright Sky information, which is mentioned here, is a really great space for this. On 5 of the days, you're going to be asked to donate, to get involved and take action that way. So on the 29th of November, we're asking people to donate to the wonderful Bakita House, and which you've heard about today. On the 2nd of December, we're asking people to donate to the Latin American Women's Rights Service that you've also heard about today. And on the 5th of December, we're asking to donate to Father Hudson's Care that you've just heard about. And on the 6th of December, we'll ask people to get involved in fundraising events for Women's Aid. And then the 8th of December, about your local food banks. So it just shows, from local organisations to small local food banks to large national organisations, there's lots of ways you can donate and get involved. As well as donating money, you can also volunteer. 2 of the days are going to focus on prayer, and these are on the 26th of November and the 28th of November. And then finally, the theme of raising awareness to take action. There's going to be 6 days on this really crucial theme. So on the 27th of November, we are promoting a report by the Faith and VAWG Coalition on the experiences of survivors and the challenges in accessing secular specialist support services. On the 30th of November, we are promoting the work of Project 17 and raising awareness of the issues faced by migrant women with no recourse to public funds. On the 1st of December, as was mentioned earlier, it's really important, to go directly to your GP. So we'll ask people to write to their GPs. We are asking people as well to sign a pledge from Women for Refugee Women, calling for the UK to welcome every woman here. On the 4th of December, we're encouraging people to speak to their priest about what is your parish doing to tackle the issues of violence against women. And this just leaves the last day. So on the last day, on the 10th of December, it's International Human Rights Day, as mentioned. And we're actually going to ask people and promote, do set up a women's group in your parish. So all of this information is going to be sent to you on a fact sheet following the webinar by Alia. And then over the 16 days, CSAN will be promoting the daily actions on social media. So please do follow, reshare and take action. Thank you.